face, but ashy grey in colour, and amongst the insipid countenances of the Martians about him marvellously thoughtful. I do not know whether those who had killed themselves by learning ever leave ghosts behind, but if so this was the very ideal for such a one. At his feet I noticed, when I unhooked my eyes from his at last, sat a girl in a loose coral pink gown who was his very antipode. Princess Heru, for so she was called, was resting one arm upon his knee at our approach, and pulling a blue convolvulus bud to pieces, a charming picture of dainty idleness. Anything so soft, so silken as that little lady was never seen before. Who am I, a poor quarter-deck loafer, that I should attempt to describe what poet and painter alike would have failed to realize? I know of course your stock descriptives, the melting eye, the coral lip, the peachy cheek, the raven tress, but these were coined for mortal women, and this was not one of them. I will not attempt to describe the glorious tenderness of those eyes she turned upon me presently, the glowing radiance of her skin, the infinite grace of every action, the incredible, soul-searching harmony of her voice, when later on I heard it. You must gather something of these things as I go. Suffice it to say that when I saw her there for the first time in the plenitude of her beauty, I fell desperately, wildly in love with her. Meanwhile even the most infatuated of mortals cannot stare forever without saying something. The grating of our prow against the garlanded side of the royal barge roused me from my reverie, and nodding to An, to imply I would be back presently, I lightly jumped on to Hath's vessel, and, with the assurance of a free and independent American voter, approached that individual, holding out my palm, and saying as I did so, "Shake hands, Mr. President." The prince came forward at my bidding and extended his hand for mine. He bowed slowly and sedately, in that peculiar way the Martians have, a ripple of gratified civility passing up his flesh. Lower and lower he bowed, until his face was over our clasped hands, and then, with simple courtesy, he kissed my finger tips. This was somewhat embarrassing. It was not like the procedure followed in courts nearer to Washington than this one, as far as my reading went, and withdrawing my fingers hastily, I turned to the princess who had risen, and was eyeing her somewhat awkwardly, the while wondering what kind of salutation would be suitable in her case when a startling incident happened. The river, as said, was full of floating rubbish brought down from some far-away uplands by a spring freshet, while the royal convoy was making slow progress upstream and thus met it all bow on. Some of this stuff was heavy timber, and when a sudden warning cry went up from the leading boats it did not take my sailor instinct long to guess what was amiss. Those in front shot side to side, those behind tried to jot back as, bearing straight down on the royal barge, there came a log of black wood 20 feet long and as thick as the mainmast of an old three-decker. Hath's boat could no more escape than if it had been planted on a rocky pedestal. Garlands and curtains trailing in the water hung so heavy on it. The gilded paddles of the slender rowers were so feeble they had made but a half turn from that great javelin's road when down it came upon them, knocking the first few pretty oarsmen head over heels and crackling through their oars like a bull through dry maize stalks. I sprang forward, and snatching a pole from a half-hearted slave, jammed the end into the head of the log and bore with all my weight upon it, diverting it a little, and thereby perhaps saving the ship herself, but not enough. As it flashed by, a branch caught upon the trailing tapestry, hurling me to the deck, and tearing away with it all that finery. Then the great spar, tossing half its dripping length into the air, went plunging downstream with shreds of silk and flowers trailing from it, and white water bubbling in its rear. When I scrambled to my feet all was ludicrous confusion on board. Hath still stood by his throne, an island in a sea of disorder, staring at me. All else was chaos. The rowers and courtiers were kicking and wallowing in the waist of the ship like fish freshly shot out of a trawl net, but the princess was gone. Where was she? I brushed the spray from my eyes and stared overboard. She was not in the bubbling blue water alongside. Then I glanced aft to where the log, now 15 yards away, was splashing through the sunshine, and as I looked, a fair arm came up from underneath and white fingers clutched convulsively at the sky. What man could need more? Down the barge I rushed, and dropping only my sword belt, leapt in to her rescue. The gentle Martians were too numbed to raise a hand in help, but it was not necessary. I had the tide with me, and gained at every stroke. Meanwhile that accursed tree, with poor Heru's skirts caught on a branch, was drowning her at its leisure, lifting her up as it rose upon the crest, a fair, helpless bundle, and then sousing her in its fall into the nether water, where I could see her gleam now and then like pink coral. I redoubled my efforts and got alongside, clutching the rind of that old stump, and swimming and scrambling, at last was within reach of the princess. Thereon the log lifted her playfully to my arms, and when I had laid hold came down, a crushing weight, and forced us far into the clammy bosom of Martian sea. Again we came up, coughing and choking, I tugging furiously at that tangled raiment, and the lady, a mere lump of sweetness in my other arm, then down again with that log upon me and all the noises of Eblis in my ears. Up and down we went, over and over, till strength was spent and my ribs seemed breaking. Then, with a last desperate effort, I got a knee against the stem, and by sheer strength freed my princess. The spiteful timber made a last ugly thrust at us as it rolled away, and we were free. I turned upon my back, and, sure of rescue now, took the lady's head upon my chest, holding her sweet white fist in mine the while, and floating, waited for help. It came only too quickly. The gallant Martians, when they saw the princess saved, came swiftly down upon us. Over the lapping of the water in my ears I heard their sigh, like cries of admiration and surprise. The rattle of spray on the canoe sides mingled with the splash of oars. The flitting shadows of their prows were all about us, and in less time than it takes to write we were hauled aboard, revived, and taken to Hath's barge. Again the prince's lips were upon my fingertips. Again the flutes and music struck up, and as I squeezed the water out of my hair and tried to keep my eyes off the outline of Heru, whose loveliness shone through her damp clinging pink robe, as if that robe were but a gauzy fancy, I vaguely heard Hath saying wondrous things of my gallantry, and, what was more to the purpose, asking me to come with him and stay that night at the palace. End of Chapter 3. This recording by James Christopher, jxchristopher@yahoo.com.